Another wonderful, exciting interview. One of our favorite things here to do at the Daybreak Star Radio Network, meet new friends, meet new business relationships. I'm Harris, Dirty Harry on the radio, joined by Sherry, my station manager. And we're honored and privileged to talk to Madeline today. And this interview has been in the works for a little while, so it's nice to see things through and get to know people and be able to promote important topics that relate to our audience, relate to our local listeners here, even though we're international. And our motto before we start, Madeline, just so you know, is indigenize in the airways. That's why we're here, to indigenize the airways. We have listeners all over the world, and people will get to know Madeline from Seattle all the way to Chile. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell everybody who you are and what your tribal affiliation is.
Hey everybody, I'm Madeline Sayet, and I'm a citizen of the Mohegan tribe in Connecticut.
Thank you so much for being here. So you're going to be having a show at the Seattle Rep pretty soon, September 9th to October 9th. It's called Where We Belong. What is that? Because it's a solo performance, right?
Yeah, it is. So it wasn't originally intended to be a play. What had happened was I went to the UK to do a PhD in Shakespeare, which, when I say it now, it's always like everyone's sort of like, well, how did you know that wasn't going to be a boatload of trouble, right? But I went to the UK to do a PhD in Shakespeare in 2015. And when I came back, I had sort of been in this phase of my life where I was flying a lot from place to place to place to place. And it was the first time I got home to Mohegan and my feet didn't like root quite right to the ground. It was the first time I felt like a little bit up in the air. And in terms of my perspective, in terms of like, normally it was like, I could feel my roots go all the way down to my ancestors. And it was like a very secure relationship to place. But I was trying to process what this meant through my Mohegan name, which means blackbird, and what it means to be a bird person. And so I started grappling with these questions. And as I was sort of trying to process what it means to be an Indigenous person in a globalized society, I was processing it through the journeys of my Mohegan ancestors who had to go to London in the 1700s on diplomatic missions for our people, and how I sort of like, was able to find sort of solace and like, I guess, not answers, but like ways of thinking about things differently through their journeys. And so I wrote this piece to grapple with some questions, thinking no one would ever see it. And it would be like my little, secret confession about like how I was feeling. And then people kept being like, oh, this is interesting. Like, will you share this? And it's like, it kept getting more and more people asking me to like share it or perform it. And the first time we performed it was at Shakespeare's Globe in 2019. And I was like so sick because I was like, they're going to be mad at me because I questioned Shakespeare in it. They're going to kick me off the stage. And also a lot of the characters in the play were in the audience. And people really resonated with it. And so then we made a film adaptation of it during the pandemic, which meant a lot more people could see it. It had a lot more accessibility. And that led to this tour. And it's been really interesting being on this tour, because at first I was really nervous about the tour concept, because it felt like very colonial to me, that like you would go somewhere as a Native person from somewhere else and like tell your story. And so we were able to create an accountability rider that goes with it, that, make sure that the theater is doing certain things in relationship to the community when we show up, that it's not just, my play that's happening, but events by local Native writers and things like that. But also it's been interesting because I've really gotten to like meet different communities through doing this. And sorry, hang on one second. And Seattle has been really fun because the last, like the 3 previews we've had so far, there's been like huge native audience turnout, which makes such a difference, like having there be some people who are there whose experience is resonating with the story, as opposed to people who are just watching you. So so it's been really great so far, the first 3 previews in Seattle, and I'm really excited to see what the rest of the run is like. But really, yeah, it's a hard play to describe because it is both about me going to do my PhD and how it mirrors the journey of my Mohegan ancestors, but also it's about a wolf who becomes a bird, and it deals with the intersection of Shakespeare, language, and colonialism.
That's great. So I have a follow-up question about that. So a lot of people don't know that Native tribal members went back to England and to France and to Belgium to talk, and to Spain, to talk sometimes to be put on show and to negotiate for our tribal rights. Would you mind just speaking to that for a second?
Sure. Yeah. So in the case of my Mohegan ancestors, there are two that I specifically focus on. But yeah, there's an immense history of Native folks crossing the ocean to London, and I think it's really important. And one of the things I was trying to address in this play, right, because people assume that people only went in one direction, and they forget that actually we were going there. Sometimes, yeah, sometimes kidnapped, right? Sometimes put on display, sometimes to die, and other times actually as diplomats, because at the time England saw us as nations, right? It was the colonial infrastructure that then started to sort of like break that down, but that actually originally we were going as diplomats, as leaders of other nations. And so in 1735, my ancestor Mahomet Weonamon goes there. Sorry. In 1735, my ancestor Mahomet Weonamon goes there, basically to petition the king for better treatment of our people, because we had an agreement and then our lands were being stolen, and he wanted him to go get his people in line, essentially. And so he thought, okay, well, as a leader, I'll go and talk to their leader. And ultimately what ends up happening is he waits for that audience, and he dies before he is actually able to get that audience with the king. And then similarly, like, my ancestor Samson Occam also went there to raise money to found an Indian school in 1766. So there are all these instances early on where actually, Native people are going to England and actually affecting British culture as much as things are coming here and affecting us here. And they're very different narratives. And even over time, right, like the play deals a little bit, I don't know if it deals as much with it anymore, but it used to deal a little bit with the difference between going over there versus being here, and how there's colonial politics in both places, but that they have a weird distance to it in the UK. So they don't really think about it as being their problem, even though, of course it is.
Madeline, how did you get into theater, and at what age, were you when you told yourself, this is my calling, this is what I'm passionate about, this is what I'm drawn up to be?
Yeah, I always was really passionate about storytelling. Growing up, my family founded back in the Great Depression, founded the oldest Indian owned and operated museum in the country, the Tanaquidgeon Indian Museum in Connecticut. And so there was this understanding that I was sort of raised with, that like by sharing our stories ourselves, we're able to sort of build bridges and make change that way. And it was kind of founded, on the idea that it's hard to hate someone you know a lot about. And so I grew up with, my family, like coming and interceding in school when it was time to like actually talk about our culture, and like getting to be a part of how we share traditional stories in that way as well. So I think that like storytelling was always very present around me. And I just always found, the capacity of stories to transform my perspective on the world and how I felt like I was operating within it. So powerful. But to be honest, like as a kid, when I first got involved in theater, it was because I didn't want to be myself. It was like, for so many young people, it's like, oh, this is how I get to be someone else and go on an adventure. And I don't have to deal with all the pressures of like everything going on around me. So it was very like escapist in a lot of ways when I was a young person. And that's why I think it's really interesting right now that like I'm performing this show everywhere, but it's actually about my culture and our issues, and it's not me being someone else, it's actually me literally being myself.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you told me that like as a kid, I would have been like, that's horrifying, but it's actually, I feel like been a really important journey for me in terms of thinking about like the value of our stories. And what's been really incredibly amazing about doing this show, because originally I was like, I will die, this is going to be terrible, it's going to be terrifying, I can't talk about this in front of people every day. But what's been really amazing is what happens is when I share my story, people share their stories back. So people will like find ways to direct message me online or through my website or leave a note for me. And they'll be like, hey, you shared your story and it made me think of this. And so I wanted to tell you this story. Or they'll be like, oh, you sharing that made me realize how important it is for me to share my story. And so I was like, oh, this is why doing the show is important, because it's having that effect on people where they then suddenly realize that all of all of these things, that everybody's stories actually do have the capacity to show people a different way of seeing things. And it's not just what maybe they thought theater was before, or just the stories that they've heard before, but that actually like their experiences really matter and offer a way for folks to connect on in deeper ways.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you've already mentioned some people who are pretty important historically, and your family. Do you have people who inspire you in theater in particular?
Yeah, of course. I mean, so early on in my career, so I was really brought into Native theater by William Yellowrobe Jr., who passed away recently back at the beginning of my career. He was really the one who got me involved in everything at the start of things, and was a really, really important mentor to me. But to be honest, like I'm inspired by so many of my like peers in Native theater now, also in the work that they're doing. I mean, they're the folks, you know, who set up, you know, our ability to do this, like folks who founded, you know, contemporary Native theater movements, like Bill, like Kanegagama, like Spider Woman Theater, right? Like all of these incredible people who worked so hard for so long so that our stories could start to be heard. And I feel so lucky, right? Coming in as a young theater artist now, when it's like, you know, I get frustrated sometimes and I'm like, how did they make it that long without like, just like, you know, getting so angry all the time? Because it's like, it's hard to get listened to now, but like comparatively, right? It was like, there wasn't any response for so long, and they still just kept fighting and kept making their work. So I'm really inspired by all those folks. And then also like a lot of the work that my peers are doing, you know, people like Larissa Fasthorse and Ty Defoe and Mary Catherine Nagel and Vera Starbard. So many people, you know, Marissa Carr. There's so many, I mean, there's so many incredible contemporary Native playwrights right now, who just Tara Moses, that I'm just so grateful to get to work with. And honestly, I think the hardest thing about this tour for me has been, usually I work as a director, which means that usually I'm working with like a ton of other Native people, and like we're all together making something, and then suddenly I'm alone and I'm like, no, which is why it's so powerful for me when like tons of Native folks show up in the audience, because then suddenly it's like, it feels more like I'm back doing the thing I like doing, which is like gathering people together and making something together. Because honestly, like when Native folks are there, it changes the story, because non-Native folks don't really know how to listen. I don't know how to describe it, but it's like they laugh and they breathe and they respond in certain ways at certain moments that then actually tunes the non-Native audience to listen to the story differently, or know that it's okay to laugh, right? And that something isn't inappropriate, things like that. So yeah, I mean, I'm inspired by so many people, so many other Native theater artists, and even here right in Seattle, like we have Red Eagle Soaring, which is so incredible. And you know, I know Daybreak Star, you know, is where they do a lot of their programming. And honestly, like I first heard about Red Eagle Soaring when I was in college, and I was like, my mind was blown, because at the time I was like, there's a Native youth theater. Like how different would my life have been if I could have gone to a Native youth theater, you know? And all the folks doing that work there are so incredible. And then also the youth are so incredible. So I'm just constantly excited to see what's coming next and who's making art, because there's so many powerful storytellers that we have amongst Native theater artists, not just who are working now like regularly, but also there's so many young folks who are coming up that also are really powerful storytellers.
What is it like for you, Madeline, having, you know, Native folks in the audience? And will you, like, before or after, will you like do a meet and greet? Will you go like, will there be time for people to interact with you, ask questions, do a quick Q&A?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm always trying to figure, I always feel bad because I'm like, I don't know how they like to, this is a good technical question that I haven't solved, because unless they know me, I don't feel like they know that they can say like, hey, is Madeline here? Can we talk to her? When in reality, like I would rather talk to everybody, like, you know, all the Native folks who come. So I think it's just about like, it's a good question for the theater, maybe about if there's a way to like formally organize something, because I know there is a community gathering of some form that's being organized. If there's any other way that like there can be some sort of facilitation of how do we sort of like connect and hang out, because it's I would actually genuinely like love to chat with folks after shows, and I really appreciate it when people take the time to do that. But it's weird because like, you know, I get out of costume and stuff, so it's like 15-20 minutes, and usually like people think, oh, we should just leave. But if people do want to talk and do want to connect, I'm really, really happy to. And I really, actually really appreciate it when that happens.
You'll have to talk to your security detail and
My
and
security.
have them make sure that they have their, necessary tools just in case people, get out of hand or get too close or anything like that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not so worried about that, but I guess, yeah, that's true. I guess I will talk to my
I'm
security.
joking, but you never know, fans, so we've seen fans sometimes they get a little excited.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I guess probably it's because like I don't think of myself as having like, fans yet.
Hey, you
So,
never know, right?
You never know. Maybe by the end of Seattle, I'm gonna have like so many fans.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does being Native influence you as a director and an actor? How do you incorporate that part of you? I mean, I know it's hard to disincorporate, but sometimes theater is about, like you said earlier, being other people.
Yeah.
And but we can't ever strip out who we are too. So how does that play for you?
Yeah. So I mean, to be honest, other than this, I haven't been doing very much. I mean, I sort of stopped doing work as an actor for a while when I became a director, which is part of why this was so terrifying. But honestly, the way that I think about it a lot is no matter what project I'm working on, it's sort of about values. And actually, I think that's the thing that's the most tense when working with non-Native artists in general, actually, is like if I'm in collaboration with a ton of other Native folks, there's a kind of like values alignment about what is important and what is not important that is kind of shared even amongst different Native nations in terms of cultural protocols a lot of the time. In terms of like how we treat people, how we treat elders, like, like why we make, why we tell stories. Like there's a certain kind of ethos to Native theater that I think is actually really comforting to be around, and is how I show up in my work. So if I'm directing, I might not be always directing a Native play, but I'm still thinking about how does Mohegan philosophy influence this, or like how does the fact that I was raised in a tribal nation that's matriarchal like affect how I direct, right? Like those things are always very present, and I think it's really important to know that like we can always be bringing that to whatever work we're doing. And that actually it's quite a gift for other folks in the space to be able to experience those other ways of working, because so often like, what people have inherited from white supremacy is so toxic and actually not a great work culture, or, is like really harmful to people, like not just Native people. So I found it's been really, something I do throughout my work is constantly question systems, constantly question hierarchies, constantly question, why things are the way they are in the worlds of different plays, and think about, like how is my storytelling, right, going to affect both those to come, but also like what would my ancestors think of this? It's just something I feel like is a constantly kind of operating framework that I think is really, really important to acknowledge, right? That it's not neutral, and that it's something that, I think is a gift that Native folks have. And when we come together in community, we have a certain way of being that I am so grateful for, and is why I think like more and more, I prefer to work on projects with lots of Native folks around me, because I just find that way of working to be so joyous, compared to like prioritizing sort of like prioritizing community, right, over prioritizing like product driven sort of ways of doing things.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Have you ever applied, Madeline, for a grant or received a grant as an artist through any particular program? And if you could describe what that process was like for you and the outcome for people that will be listening that are going through that trajectory right now in their careers.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I've done that a lot on behalf of organizations. I have applied, I think for myself early on in my career, I applied to a lot of different fellowship programs. There wasn't necessarily funding, but it brought you together with other people who you might meet and develop opportunities that way. I think honestly, my general approach early on in my career, which I think was very helpful, was that I developed this weird habit in college where like late at night when other people were like, partying or texting people they shouldn't be texting or whatever, I would like open my inbox and I would just kind of like weirdly compulsively apply to everything that had come into my inbox. And sometimes the next day I'd be like, what did I apply to? Like, I don't even know what that is. Like, I don't want to do that, but it was, it got me in the habit of knowing that like, it's better to apply than to not apply at all, right? Yeah, there's the applications where you're going to want to put like a ton of work into each section and really focus on it. But that's all really honestly about knowing who you are as an artist and how to talk about that. And the practice of doing that is actually as important as like the perfected version. And sometimes if you're applying to something, you don't know when there's only going to be 5 other people applying, you don't know if it's going to be thousands of people or if it's just going to be you. So I think getting over the fear of just applying as a first step is really actually more important than people realize. And then I think in terms of being able to actually like, really get further in some of these systems, I serve on a lot of grant panels and things like that. And I have since I was pretty young. And honestly, so much of it is about clarity and just answering the questions. Like, it seems like it could be more than that, but sometimes you're like, this person didn't answer the question. It's actually like about really just looking at what's there, what they're asking of you, and being as clear as possible with why you do what you do and what you're going to make, and why it matters, why it's important. And that's the thing I actually really love about, like nonprofit art sector as opposed to commercial art sector, is that people really want to know why what you're doing matters, like how it might change people, why it's good for the world. They don't really care, if people are going to come or if like that stuff isn't as important. So it's really, I think it's really just about being able to sculpt, like, practice writing, right? First of all, I think being a writer gives me a huge advantage compared to other folks in the arts, right? When it comes to grant writing, because I'm already a writer. So practicing that skill of writing, practicing that skill of who are you as an artist and how do you talk about your work? And then just knowing, like, when in doubt, apply. You can always apply again. It's not like you apply once and then you didn't get it and you can't apply again. There's so many things that I've gotten that it was like the 3rd time I applied,
Yeah.
And I think that that's really important to remember also.
Persistency. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So as an actor and director, what advice would you give to somebody wanting to get into that world, into the theater world?
Yeah, just let people, honestly, if they're native, I would say just let people know that you want to get involved, because honestly, like, we're always looking to include more people. I think about how, like, this past spring for the Yale Indigenous Performing Arts program that I'm the executive director of, our spring new native play festival, like I had to cast 75 people, and so there were some instances in which I was just like, asking friends like, hey, who do you know who might be good for this? And honestly, like, I feel like amongst native people and communities, so much stuff is word of mouth, and so many people know each other that the really, like, if you let people, if you let the native theater community in Seattle know that you're interested in being involved in stuff, if you let the native theater community on your res know that you're interested in being involved in stuff, everything gets connected. And I think what was really incredible about the moment during the pandemic when all the theater was on Zoom was I got to meet so many people I would have never met otherwise, because I was sort of confined to, who's local or who's in the region. And then suddenly it was like we could work with anybody anytime. And some of that still exists. Some processes are still working that way. Some audio projects are still working that way. And I feel like really, like, obviously, like, if you want to hone your craft, you can take a class, we offer a lot of online free workshops at the Yale Indigenous Performing Arts program. We have also like 2 awards annually. The Young Native Playwrights Award, which is an award for a Native playwright under 25 and under, who you submit, and then you get a developmental opportunity at Yale and a cash prize to work with professional Native theater artists. And there's also an award for young Native actors that actually is called the Misty Upham Award for young Native actors that we worked with her family to create, to honor her legacy of really believing in Native youth joining the theater. So that award also is a really powerful opportunity for young people. But you just submit, a monologue, you email, and then you submit a monologue. And that's a cash prize, and also another way to get involved with other people. But what's interesting, right, is even the people who submit to that, either one of those, and even if they don't win, everybody knows who they are then, so it's like suddenly we're all then connected to that many more people. And I know Radio Soaring has lots of opportunities for Native youth out here. And there's just, there's so many more opportunities, I think, than people realize. And it's just about sort of like, I think, starting by like looking around to see what theaters are near you. And even if there's not a Native theater, if you let the people at that theater know, they might be able to connect you to some folks who might be able to, you might be able to work with. So there's a lot out there.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. Last question, what's next for you? What's any exciting announcements that you haven't officially made yet that we can have a world exclusive on, or you want to just focus on the priorities right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I know it's weird. It's weird being on a tour because normally I do so many projects in a row. So what am I working on right now? Also, I just wanted to add to think before, I think it's important to remember that the way that the play that I'm currently touring around got made is I wrote something by myself, the equivalent of a journal entry, for no money originally, right? And then everyone was like, oh, we want to watch this. And so you don't know what the thing is that you make that people are going to care about, so just you can always just tell your story and then stand up in front of people and see what happens, even if no one else is supporting you yet. In terms of next things, so I am doing Where We Belong until the end of 2022. But because it's here and then it's at the Public Theater in New York. In between, I am directing a week-long workshop of a play by Melissa Tanaquidgen-Zobel about Flying Bird, who is also a character in my play, who is the last fluent speaker of the Mohegan language. And so that'll be great. That'll be at Long Wharf Theater in New Haven. And then next year, I'm continuing development on a couple of my other plays that I've been working on. One is this, it's like, how do I describe it? It's so one is this post-apocalyptic narrative called The Fish, that is about these three siblings who are all both Native and Jewish, and it's this Noah's Ark allegory that sort of deals with the waters rising and what happened last time, and the idea that there are these like ancient fish that kind of hold all of this ancestral knowledge. And what it kind of came from the idea of someone had asked me how to write about that intersection of that identity, and I didn't want to write about it from one perspective, so I thought siblings is the answer, because we all know, anybody between cultures knows if you have siblings, you're not all on the same page. You got a lot going on. But it's it came out of thinking about this question of, in the Noah's Ark story, the fish, nothing happens to the fish. So I thought about this question of what does it mean to go underwater in order to survive? And that historically, there's always been these groups of people who have to kind of like submerge and then come back up. And what is that? So there's an exploration of that. And then there's also been this piece that I've been working on with Ed Littlefield, who's Ed. Ed. Okay, great. He's in Seattle, right? Ed's in Seattle. Anyway, so he did the composition for and Kenny Ray. It was really, honestly, I created this piece, even though I hate Peter Pan, because I wanted Kenny Ramos needed to be able to fly, was basically what it came down to. And anyone who knows Kenny, who's Kumeyaay, knows that makes sense. So it was actually like, it has an indigenous protagonist for the framework. Instead of it being anything like the original Peter Pan, the framework is they're in this very assimilationist school. And, not just the Native folks, but also like, queer youth and trans youth are being told, no, you all have to be one thing. And then how do we go someplace where actually what we are is being valued? And then at the end, they have to come back and kind of like fix, uncover what was in our world all the time, right? So it becomes more of a indigenizing framework throughout the piece, but you still have an adventure to go on. And this all stemmed about because Kenny needed to be able to fly. But mostly, honestly, next year, I'm really excited to get back to working with people like Vera Starbard and Mary Catherine Nagel, and Molly and Dana and folks like that on their plays. Because as a director, I feel like that's like my privilege, is getting to like support the development of these works from many other Native artists that are so incredible. And I'm really looking forward to like taking a backseat on like me having to be on stage talking in front of a lot of people, unless something very strange happens. But I don't know that my career as a stand-up comedian is anywhere in the future. So
never know, right? Never know.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. So Madeline's show is coming up, Seattle Rep, September 9th through October 9th. Get your tickets if you're Native. Be in the audience and support in a good way. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Madeline.
Thank you.
That's Mishnewe.